Welcome boys and girls, Costin here with my Kislev unit tier list for Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires campaigns in 2026. When you're playing a Kislev campaign, 3 of the legendary lords start very close to each other. With Astanka it's a choice, but you really do want to go for Kislev starting position in that campaign. So you have Kastaltin, you have Katrin, you have Astanka, you have Prague that you can gain fairly quickly in a campaign. The only one that's a bit further off, and only a bit, is Boris Ursus, but he's still fairly close. And you're dealing with the same factions. You're dealing with Trog, you're dealing with Frot, you're dealing with Azazel, Arbol, Archeon, Demon Prince, and Astrogoth. Basically, you're dealing with factions that primarily recruit melee units. Skaven, yes, they can recruit range units, but Frot does have a tendency of going full-on with clan rats, Skaven slaves, all that. Astrogoth is the only exception, but basically when you're playing Kislev campaign, you're going to be looking at melee units, you're going to be looking at monstrous units with Trog, you're going to be looking at fast-moving units, cavalry units. So that's something that is going to decide what kind of units are useful in a Kislev campaign. Because once you deal with those foes, pretty much nothing can stop you, and other threats, well, let's just put it simply, they do not compare with the ridiculousness of, say, Trog and Arbol, or the powerful army that Archeon can get, for instance. So we start with Kislevite warriors, an S tier unit if there is one in terms of tier 1 units. Now these guys are basically the equivalent of halberdiers for Kislev, but one, they can be recruited from every single settlement, which is a significant advantage, and two, they're fly out better. They do a good amount of damage, they have a pretty good amount of survivability. Again, we're looking at tier 1 units. And they have exceptional morale because By Our Blood makes Kislev units unbreakable for a certain amount of time. Not fully unbreakable, keep that in mind, but unbreakable when it counts during the course of your campaign battles. And that they'll go temporarily unbreakable and then they'll break. So you get the benefits of having a unit that will stand its ground for a longer period of time, and then when they really are about to die, they will finally break. And that's one of the things that really makes the Kislev units work. And these guys just basically are really good against everything that you're dealing with early on in a campaign. Then we have regular Kossars. So with regular Kossars and Kossars with the spear, I'm going to say that they're B tier units. Not terrible. See the range unit you recruit very early on in a campaign until you replace them with Streltsy. They just don't have the staying power in a longer campaign, but they are very useful early on, obviously. So a combination of Kislev warriors and Kossars is really the army composition you want to go for early on in your Kislev campaign. Just a fairly effective unit, just not A tier or S tier, simply because they just don't scale up throughout the course of their campaigns, and you do have better range units, one of which is, of course, Akshinas. So Akshinas, an A tier unit, a crossbow unit, a stealth unit, basically the equivalent of Rangers for Kislev, though in some ways even better than Rangers. Like Rangers, Dwarven Rangers, even Bugman's Rangers, kind of a situational unit, whereas Akshinas are just flat out a good range unit that you want to get. A crossbow unit, like other Kislev units, you're looking at staying power in a battlefield. Obviously, it's not a melee unit, but still, range crossbows with a certain element of stealth baked in. That is a pretty damn useful unit to have. Obviously, armor piercing, weapon damage, and all that is something that they don't necessarily have enough of to really contend with Chaos Warriors, but they're pretty damn good against essentially everything that you will be facing. And you don't want to get the structure because, hags in a campaign. Then we have armored Kossars. So Armor Kossars, both A-tier units. So you have the shielded version, you have the great weapon version. Not quite S-tier. Like when you look at Kislevite warriors, they are S-tier because they're just freaking ridiculous for the tier they're at and ease of recruitment. Armor Kossars do require a higher tier, but still really effective units, very durable, and the natural upgrade path in your campaign for your armies. Kind of a lot of your mid-game armies may include quite a lot of these guys, unless you want to go down the path of Tsar Guard. And that depends on how quickly you can get those Tsar Guard, really, and that can vary a bit depending on Grove and how you play that around. Then we have Streltsy. So these guys are a handgunner unit combined with a pretty solid enough melee unit. I mean, they're decent in melee. They're not the best unit in melee, but they can hold their own against quite a few units. And you can recruit quite a lot of these guys through Prague, especially. Like, one of the benefits of Kislev is Prague, like the landmarks there, global recruitment, the fact that you get Armor Kossars, Streltsy, and Griffin Legion through Prague is just very, very good to have. But yeah, Streltsy, range gunpowder unit with the durability, with the melee durability, or kind of the armor at least, of, Armor Kossar. So, very damn good unit to have. Not quite the same level of Null Ironsides, but still a very, very good unit to get. Then we have Tsar Guard. I'm going to say both shielded version and two-handed version are also S-tier units, simply because, heavy Kislev infantry, armor piercing, good against other infantry units if you're looking at the two-handed version. The shielded version is just a more durable line holder. But yeah, your ultimate melee unit as Kislev. And here's the thing, the whole hybrid unit aspect of Kislev didn't quite end up working out the way people want. Like the hybrid tax, if you want to call it that, is not necessarily great. But here you have dedicated melee units that can, while they won't be chosen necessarily in a campaign, they can hold their own quite effectively against pretty much any infantry unit in the game. Again, they need support, magical support, range support, monster support, but still very good units to get. Then we have Ice Guards, the two versions of Ice Guards. So you have Ice Guards with dual weapons and Ice Guards with spears, basically, or pole arms. Anyway, these guys, when we're looking at their range combat power, they're really only good to slow down units. The main value proposition of Ice Guard is if you're fighting a lot of demonic units, but realistically, when you're playing a Kislev campaign, by the time you can even recruit Ice Guard, you should have dealt with, say, Arbol, who is the one that usually brings up a lot of those units. And it's really against Bloodletters. Like, you don't care about Nurgle. Most units will handle Nurgle just quite effectively, Nurgle armies in a campaign. But yeah, Ice Guard, a lot of people do like them, but I think that an army of Streltsys, Akshinas, Tsar Guard, just generally more effective. Even in a Katrin army, and only for Katrin herself, I tend to gravitate towards other units more than I do towards Ice Guard, just because better survivability, more usefulness in most general combat situations. Like, yeah, Ice Guards, a couple of them can help you out, but they are more of a support unit than one of your main combat damage dealer units or line holder units in a campaign. Then we have Kislev Warhounds, if you will. That's what I'm going to call these guys. An F-tier unit. A fast-moving unit, to be certain, but given the foes you're dealing with, and even if you're dealing with a lot of range units and artillery units, these would not be the best. Like, you have fast-moving units in a Kislev campaign. You have good cavalry units. You have skirmisher cavalry units or chariots. So I think these kind of cast Warhounds, or redeemed, or, corruption-solved Warhounds that Kislev has, just not really worth ever recruiting in a Kislev campaign. Yeah, even if you're playing Estancia, They're just better units to get in an Estan campaign, like those armored spiders that she can get, but still, just not really worth it. Dervishes. One of the most useless units in the game. A light cavalry unit that's pretty fast, and that's really the main benefit. But again, look at what you're dealing with. Where is a situation where you're really going to benefit from dervishes? None. In a campaign, really. They lack durability. Yes, they have speed, but essentially every opponent that you're dealing with, including the Chaos Dwarves, will destroy these guys very easily. And they are not going to do any kind of real damage to justify them. Horse archers of Kislev, I'm just going to say that I don't think horse archers are worth recruiting all that much during the course of a campaign. But some situations where you want to harass the enemy, where you want to send a unit, relatively fast-moving unit, to harass the enemy, get some units to chase them down while your main battle line engages most of their armies, can be useful. But to be quite honest with you, given the building you need to build for them, in fact, I could easily argue in favor of F tier for these guys, but I think there's just a couple of situations where you may want to use them. Very few, however. Then we have Winged Lancers, or Winged Hussars, really, of Kislev. Now, in terms of combat effectiveness, they are actually pretty good as a cavalry unit, if we're considering that. In fact, you could even argue from a pure combat perspective, you know, in isolation, if we ignore everything else, these are really good shock cavalry. Glorious Charge is a hell of a thing to have. But you do have Griffin Legion, and you have two landmarks from which to recruit Griffin Legions. One Castalton has, so if you confederate them quickly enough, you can get them. And then you have Prague, both of them at tier 3. So the question is, why would you recruit Winged Lancers when you have Griffin Legion, which is flat out the better unit? Because basically that's what Griffin Legion are. They're Winged Lancers, just better as a unit in every way, shape, or form. In fact, I would say Winged Lancers, or Griffin Legion rather, Griffin Legion are just a really damn good cavalry unit. Not a kind of cavalry unit that you want to stay and fight in a prolonged melee, far from it. That's why we have warbears. But all the same, when we're talking about a shock cavalry unit, cycle charging unit, they're really, really good from that perspective. And honestly, I would even rank them S tier if we were dealing with opponents where, you know, cycle charging was somewhat more useful. But given what we're tackling, like a lot of heavily armored melee units, or just the swarms of Norska, yeah, they don't quite make the cut of S tier, but just damn, a really great unit. Then we have Warbear Riders. I'm really tempted to put them in S tier, to be honest, but yeah, tier requirements kind of prevent that to a degree. But yeah, your best cavalry in the game, Monstrous cavalry units. And it's got to be said, Monstrous cavalry units tend to do far, far better than one might think. Yes, you have fewer entities, but these guys are good against enemy cav. They can hold their own against vast majority of melee units. They can deal with single entities. Just a really solid unit. Honestly, if you could recruit these guys at tier 3, they would be S tier, definitely. Little Grom. I'm going to say Little Grom is a C tier unit. You know, I was considering putting it a bit higher, but honestly, like, when you look at Little Groms, is you look at the unit situation in a campaign where, yes, it's a good artillery unit in sieges, but that's basically it. And what's really annoying about this, like, if it was a tier 3 unit, you know, that would be one thing, but it's not. It's a unit that you get hired there. It would be nice if Kislev had its own version of cannons, but really in a Kislev campaign, you either ignore artillery most of the time, or you just simply get it through allied recruitment. So Little Groms just kind of fall by the wayside. Again, not a terrible unit in sieges. Not really good in field battles. Like, it's basically a mortar, if you will, a mortar with a big shot, with a cannonball shot, or arcs and all that, but still, not really that useful in battles. More useful from the perspective of siege, is far more useful, but you can get better units that are also good in battle through allied recruitment. And that's the thing, you got good relations with dwarves and Empire in a Kislev campaign, so getting cannons from them, or getting cannons from the Empire, getting cannons from Malachi, or even Ungarum, if you meet him, when you should meet him. It's just a better choice. Then we have light war sleds. Where to put them? So I think like light war sleds are an A-tier unit. Not the most durable chariot unit in the world, sure, but they are still a fairly effective chariot unit. They do a good amount of range damage, and they can hold their own quite effectively in melee. Not as effectively, or, light war sleds. They're not quite as effective as some other chariot units in that role, but let me just say this. This is the unit, or there's a lot of units or certain combinations, arm combinations, that make Kislev so ridiculous in multiplayer battles that quite a few tournaments actually banned them, because, yeah, it's just by our blood combined with the skirmishing capability of these guys. The damage is there, the survivability is there, but then you have heavy war sleds. And that's definitely an S tier unit. The only downside, of course, you have tier requirements, you do have recruitment time, but geez, this isn't really a chariot unit. I mean, it does function as a chariot unit, but let me put that from a perspective. This is a unit that can do a decent amount of range damage, so skirmishing capability, and then basically you throw it in a melee fight, and it more often than not wins against an opponent. And even if you're not winning, you just go in, do a charge, do some damage, get out. They're slower, sure, but they're so much better in terms of survivability than light war sleds. Then we have snow leopards. I'm gonna say this is a C tier unit, and I think I'm being generous here. Yes, snow leopards can be good against monsters and single entities and all that kind of stuff, sure, but they're a glass cannon unit at best, and they're very situational where you want to use them. If you want to kill single entities, you got options, ranged options, sleds, war bears, all that stuff. So yeah, I just think snow leopards, the main value is that you can summon them in battle with, with ice witches, but that's basically it. That's the value proposition of snow leopards. Then we have frost worms. Yeah, Kislev does have a number of S tier units. Go figure, considering they're dealing with frost worms. They're a great unit. They're a great single entity from multiple perspectives. First off, they're basically a ground dragon with all the bells and whistles that come with that. Well, breath minus that. But they don't have the mobility, but they're a really effective monstrous unit that, very importantly, you can recruit at tier 3. So this is why I really like these guys. Not only are they, generally speaking, an effective combat unit against most things that you're going to be dealing with in a campaign, they are also available. Like, consider this, Starguard, Streltsy, Kislev warriors. The benefits they have is not that they're just combat effective, is also how easy enough it is to recruit them. And that's the thing with frost worms. They are available when it really counts in a campaign. Sure, they can be expensive, upkeep, recruitment, all that, but this is an actual monstrous unit, a kind of elite monstrous unit. Not quite as good as, obviously, you're looking at Warhammer or something like that, but you will actually recruit these in a campaign when it freaking counts. And Kislev campaigns tend to be faster paced than many other campaigns because you got a lot of foes to deal with early on. You survive that, you're unstoppable. Incarnate Elemental of Beasts. A big ass single entity that, honestly, I just view it mostly as kind of fluff, really. It can be decently effective, but yeah, tier requirements just make it not really the most appealing thing to recruit in a campaign. I mean, you will get the structure for these, but then again, most of the time you just kind of don't really want to bother. Then we have elemental bears. I'm just going to put these guys on seat here. The ultimate monstrous unit of Kislev. I would say that these guys are more effective than incarnate elemental beast, though obviously, you know, they're bigger. So there's downsides, you know, because of their sheer size, but in terms of combat capability as well as certain skills that you can get for them, certain benefits that you can get for them, skill lines and all that. Yeah, you may not use them a lot, but they can be pretty solid in a campaign like just for that end game. But really, Kislev campaigns especially are very front-ended. If certain units were easier to recruit, like Lorem, Incarnates, and Elemental Bears, probably would rank them higher, but as it is, I just think like Elemental Bears are a C tier unit. And that's Kislev's army roster and where I stand on it. There's obviously a great deal of variety of range units, melee unit, cavalry unit, monstrous units, chariot units. You're lacking in terms of air capability and you're lacking in terms of artillery, but you have the core army that any faction should have. And this is, by the way, one of the big benefits in a Kislev campaign. It's not just the fact that you have individually good units, you have good armies. And the things you're lacking, artillery, well, you can get that easily enough from allied recruitment because of your diplomatic relationship and ships with dwarves and empire. And most of the time, when you're talking about things that matter in a campaign to really have, infantry and range units are two things that really, really do make a difference in terms of just being able to recruit them yourself and then using allied recruitment to fill the gaps. But not that there's many gaps in a Kislev campaign, really. Costin here, signing out. Stay tuned for more.